The United Kingdom has an epic history and a wealth of secrets still to uncover. Every year, hundreds of archaeologists dig, dive, and sieve to find clues to add to the great historical jigsaw of our ancestors' lives.
You know when people say, what's the best thing you've ever found, guys? This.
I'm Professor Alice Roberts. This year we've uncovered some astonishing finds and made some truly groundbreaking discoveries.
Wow, look at that.
Each team of archaeologists has been armed with a dig diary camera so they can record their discoveries as they happen.
That is brilliant. Dave, I love you.
Our roving archaeologist, Dr. Nisha McSweeney, is out on the digs.
Who are we looking at?
It's royal.
And I'll be inviting the teams to bring in their finds for closer analysis.
That is absolutely beautiful.
In this special edition of Digging for Britain, we're exploring the archaeology of World War II. We're joining digs from across the country to give us an insight into the lives of those who lived and fought during the war from the physical evidence they left behind. We'll witness the raising of a World War II bomber from the depths of the English Channel, the unearthing of one of Hitler's feared V2 rockets, and an excavation of a hostel where young Holocaust survivors were brought after the war. Welcome to Digging for Britain. I've come to the Imperial War Museum in Duxford, Cambridgeshire. It was from this airfield that the first Spitfires took off for the Battle of Britain in July 1940. Countless Allied missions flew from airfields right across Britain, heading for Nazi-occupied Europe. But some planes never made it that far. And we head now to the Solent, where a chance discovery has prompted a large-scale diving operation. They are attempting to recover the amazingly intact remains of a Second World War bomber. The excavation is located 500 metres offshore, not far from Gosport Harbour. It was here in 2018 that the National Grid planned to lay an electricity cable to France, and they first needed to conduct an underwater survey of the seafloor.
Yeah. Right, that looks like something.
It's really hard to tell. It's been down there a long time, whatever it is.
Looks like a section of an engine, that it looks like. Got cables there, have you? That looked like the framework of a wing or something.
They'd stumbled upon a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. A World War II bomber known as a fairy Barracuda that appeared to be completely intact. The Barracuda was designed by British company Fairy Aviation. It was built as a torpedo dive bomber, the first of its kind made entirely from metal. It could carry a variety of deadly payloads, from 6 250-pound bombs to a 450-pound depth charge or a huge 1,600-pound torpedo. The Barracuda made its maiden flight in December 1940 and was operated by the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. At the discovery site under the Solent, a team from Wessex Archaeology have been brought in to try to raise this extraordinary plane from the seafloor.
The aircraft is buried in a buttery type mud, which is not easy when it comes to excavation. Above the seabed, very little remains. But as we are excavating down, more and more is becoming open to us.
More than 2,600 Barracudas were built, but not a single complete plane survives today. Dave Morris from the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Somerset is heading up an ambitious project to reconstruct an entire Barracuda using salvaged parts.
We have crash site remains from a number of barracudas which have been recovered over more than 40 years of collecting now, but they've all been subject to, very fast collisions to high ground mountainsides. This is the first time that we've come across a barracuda which is largely still intact and in most of its original shape.
It will be a dream come true for Dave's rebuild project if the plane can be raised in one piece.
It's pretty amazing. You descend down the shot line and you see the remains of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that is quite prominent on the seabed. As you go further back, there are the remains of the fuselage, the cockpit and the wings that are still in place.
Records note that a Barracuda took off on the 6th of January 1944 from HMS Daedalus, which is now the nearby Lyon-Solent airfield. It suffered engine failure and pitched into the sea. The pilot managed to bail out and survived the crash.
We know that it was a fairly smooth belly landing rather than a violent crash. We know the pilot escaped okay. So there's a lot of information we're putting together from records and also matching that against the evidence that we're finding on the seabed now.
Before the plane can be raised, a powerful underwater siphon pump is used to suck the mud out from around the fuselage and wings. But working out how to raise the plane intact is proving to be a significant challenge. The divers realise the frame is much more fragile than they previously thought. The mud is tightly packed into the individual component parts, making the plane very heavy and likely to break up on lifting.
We're going to have to dismantle the aircraft underwater because unfortunately it's too fragile to bring up in one piece.
Despite the setback, the divers have managed to isolate a large part of one of the wings and are carefully preparing it for lifting. Slowly, the unbroken wing piece is brought up from the seafloor. Once out of the water, the team need to work quickly.
It starts to decay as soon as it comes out. It's been in the sea for 75 years or so. When you're trying to conserve archaeological material, you want to try and keep it in the same conditions to how it's been. What we're going to do is wrap it up and then keep it at least wet, damp, to try and stop the corrosion continuing.
The plane hasn't come up in one piece, but as more parts are slowly brought to the surface, Dave Morris is optimistic.
Absolutely amazed to see, obviously, a piece of the Barracuda coming up after 76 years. Yeah, you can still tap on the aluminium. I expected it to be a lot more corroded, considering it's been down there for so many years.
Later on, we'll be following the recovered parts of the plane, which will be taken to the Fleet Air Arm Museum. For now, Dave still has high hopes he can use these parts to help complete his reconstruction of this long-forgotten plane. Our next dig is in the Lake District, where archaeologists are excavating the site of a very special hostel. It was a temporary home for hundreds of children who were rescued from concentration camps in Nazi-occupied Europe and brought to Britain to start a new life. On the shore of Lake Windermere, in the heart of the Lake District, is the village of Troutbeck Bridge. The archaeologists here are hoping to shed light on an incredible wartime story of survival against the odds.
The Holocaust isn't just something that happened in Eastern Europe. We have sites related to the Holocaust here on British shores. So this is one of them. We're excavating the remains of what we think is a hostel where Jewish children were brought at the end of the war.
The dig is organised by the Lake District Holocaust Project. It aims to remember the special role this area played in helping to rehabilitate children liberated from Nazi concentration camps at the end of the war. Two boys that came here in 1945 were Ike Alterman and Sam Laskier.
That's me, a cheerful little fella.
Life in Poland for these Jewish boys changed dramatically the moment Germany invaded in September 1939.
We were lined up The assessment came and started counting. Father was in front and I was behind him. And he said to me, stand on your tiptoe to make you look a bit taller than you are. Next to him was my mother, my sister, my little brother. All those on the right, stay where you are. All those on the left, march out through the front of the square there. That's my mother, my little brother, sister, never to be seen again.
Both boys were sent to a succession of concentration camps before ending up in Auschwitz-Birkenau.
You had a number tattooed. See, that was tattooed to me in Birkenau.
But then, in May 1945, the boys were finally liberated from a camp in Czechoslovakia.
We were in the wagon. We didn't know what was going on. But suddenly, we looked around, and there were no guards. They just disappeared. And that is the moment that we realized we were free. I am the one waving his hat. Everybody's so happy. We're alive. We're alive. We couldn't believe.
On the 13th of August, they were flown from Prague and brought by bus up to Windermere.
Well, I knew wherever they're taking me, it's going to be much better wherever I was.
The boys were housed in one of 3 hostels located on what was the Kalgarth estate, a town that had been built during the war to house workers from the nearby Sunderland flying boat factory. After the war, the town was demolished and a school was built here. This is the first time the site has been excavated. The team are hoping to find evidence of one of the hostel buildings in the hope that they can learn something about the lives of the children that were brought here.
We're finding huge amounts still exist within the ground. So that includes the sort of types of material that the structures were made from. So we're finding bricks and concrete and mortar. We're finding things like window glass.
300 orphaned Jewish children were brought to the Lake District. They were known as the Windermere Boys.
Many of the children who came here had been in Bergen-Belsen, some of them had been in Auschwitz, but other slave labour camps, forced labour camps, in ghettos across Europe. So for many, many years, they'd experienced terrible, terrible atrocities. They were very much alone. They didn't know how many of their family members survived.
But not all of the Windermere Boys were actually boys. In fact, 28 of them were girls. Denise's mother, Minia, was one of them.
My mum was very proud to be one of the boys, although they were in the minority, because they made a fuss of the girls as well. They had plenty of boys to choose from.
Denise has been helping out with the dig.
We found lots of pieces of tiles and water pipes, or sewage pipes. We were thinking that it's probably some kind of bathroom. I was thinking my mum must have had to wash in the bathroom over there.
The team are finding lots of evidence of the hostel building, but precious few personal items.
One of the objects that we found, quite a poignant one, we think, and it's a little tiny plastic unicorn, which may or may not have been as a pendant around somebody's neck.
So this looks to be a really interesting find of a small penknife. It looks like it's made of mother of pearl, but it's so corroded that the blade can't actually come out. It's the kind of thing that, you know, a child would have had and really looked after and carried around with them everywhere.
It may have been more than 70 years ago, but Sam and Ike's memories of arriving in Windermere are still vivid.
So we arrived at night, so we didn't know much. The following morning, you see the hills and the lake. We had our place near the lakes as well. And we thought, this is paradise.
This is the main hall. That's me. over here. There was beds, clean sheets, pillowcases. We run outside, you know, we didn't have any proper things to wear. Some went out in their underpants and that. We were wild. We were wild. It was the most fantastic feeling.
Although the rescued children only lived here for 6 months, it was a life-changing experience. They were offered counselling and schooling, including English lessons, before being resettled elsewhere in the UK.
Discover the past with exclusive ancient history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything from the wonders of Pompeii to the rebellion of Boudica and the mysteries of prehistoric Scotland. Immerse yourself in the captivating stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
It is a very positive story of hope in a terrible time of despair, and I think it's really important to humanise the stories of refugees.
Today, Ike and Sam have come back to the village as they're keen to see the excavation.
It is very important, and it's very important that we also tell people what it was like. Although a lot of things have changed, but we kept the memories.
The dig has helped local residents reconnect with this unique and important time in their village's history.
Archaeology speaks to people in a special kind of way, and I think we owe the survivors and the children the chance to put their story out there, and I think that's what archaeology can do.
I've invited Kevin to come and tell me more about the project.
Kevin, you've been digging in the Lake District, but your usual work focusing on the Holocaust takes you over to Eastern Europe. So this is a very different kind of dig for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot in Eastern Europe. Looking at the archaeology of what happened during the Holocaust takes us to Poland and Ukraine and those sort of areas. But this project gave us the opportunity to do something a little bit closer to home.
And you did find a selection of quite personal objects. So I think this one really stands out for me, this little horse.
So we're not sure whether it's a horse or a unicorn. I think it's a unicorn, or it's an important object. It dates to around late 30s, 40s, so it's the right sort of period, with a unicorn being a mythical creature associated with hope and magic.
Yeah.
To find that on the site where we were looking for evidence of what these boys went through and how they lived their life in Windermere, then that was a perfect start for us, actually,
yeah, it's
to
lovely.
find that.
Is it a little pendant?
A little pendant, yeah. Wear around the neck.
Yeah. What I find really kind of moving about this is that, that might be something that I dig up in my garden at home, and it has very little meaning attached to it. In this context,
absolutely,
it comes with all that meaning.
And then
what's that? A tube?
Interesting, curly top. So it's a hair curling gel, but it's made for toddlers and babies.
Yes, it says for toddlers.
For toddlers.
Curly top.
So it's to make your baby's hair grow curly.
The natural hair curler for toddlers.
So it would have been a culture shock to these children to all of a sudden be in an environment where you could curl your baby's hair using a gel.
And then, what about this buckle?
Quite important. It's a belt buckle. It's quite common to the period, so we're talking sort of 1930s, 1940s, right through to the 50s. It could well be that this belonged to one of them.
What else have we got? There's a bottle top.
Yeah, vino, isn't it? But that is a cough medicine. It just demonstrates that these children went from having no medical care whatsoever to all of a sudden to find themselves in a place where if they got a cough, they would be given some Vino's cough medicine by a nurse or a doctor.
Yeah.
It just demonstrates how dramatically their life changed overnight.
Yeah. And the care that was suddenly around them.
Absolutely.
Do you think finding objects like this, does it make it feel as though that time is more distant or closer to the present day when you find these objects?
The sort of argument here is that why do we do archaeology on such a recent period? Because we already know the answers, because we've got books and photographs and all sorts of things. But actually I think it's important because archaeologists look at evidence and data in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
So we are asking new questions of these archive documents and these data. So actually we can present new evidence, and that's what this project is all about. It's bringing to the forefront this little section of Windermere in the 1940s just to see what the life was like for these people.
We now turn our attention to another group of people who came to Britain during the war. In the build-up to D-Day, military camps sprung up right across the country. As well as housing British soldiers, these sites were home to thousands of Canadian and American troops. Our next dig comes from Salisbury, where a team of British ex-military personnel are hoping to find the remains of a barracks used by the 2nd Battalion of the US Army's 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, otherwise known as Easy Company. The men of this elite American parachute unit also came to be known as the Band of Brothers. They came to Britain in September 1943 and remained here for 9 months, preparing alongside other Allied troops for the D-Day invasion. Their training camp was located near the village of Aldbourne in Wiltshire. MOD archaeologist Richard Osgood is on site with members of Operation Nightingale. This is an initiative using archaeology to support the recovery of military personnel injured in conflict.
On the surface you can see nothing. This is just a sports pitch. What we wanted to do to see if archaeology could tell us anything about what lies below this surface and link us to those men from Easy Company and take us back to those days of D-Day.
We know from military photographs that in 1943 and 44, this field housed a number of wooden barracks. This was the first time these young soldiers had left their base in America.
Some of them described it as the best accommodation they had in the whole war, and others said they felt that they were on a Hollywood film set because this village is so beautiful.
But the paratroopers would soon leave this quaint Wiltshire village far behind. In the early hours of the 6th of June 1944, the men of Easy Company were dropped behind enemy lines in Normandy. Their mission to seize key bridges and clear routes leading away from Utah Beach to allow safe passage of US ground troops who would arrive by sea just a few hours later. The plan went awry, with many missing their drop zone. But they still managed to capture and destroy 4 German field guns, saving countless Allied lives. Easy Company went on to become one of the best-known Allied fighting forces in the war, even making it all the way to Hitler's mountaintop retreat in the Bavarian Alps. Back at the dig, the team are hoping to find some personal items. They want to gain a glimpse into the lives of these soldiers when they were stationed here during the weeks leading up to the D-Day invasion.
One of the really exciting bits about archaeology is when you're able to put yourselves literally in the footsteps of people that did incredible deeds in the past.
Already they're finding telltale structures just beneath the surface.
Not many people get excited by concrete necessarily, especially 20th century concrete, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pads of a building that were put into this field in the 1940s, and this is the remnants of the platoon sergeant's building.
What have you got there?
It looks like some sort of iron cooking pot, possibly.
It's a coin. It's a 1944 halfpenny.
They're also finding artefacts that directly link to Easy Company's pivotal role on D-Day.
Just pulled this out of the ground. We didn't have a clue what it was, but we borrowed Paul's book and we found out exactly what it was. It's the handle for the emergency parachutes. Yeah,
oh my
fantastic.
God.
There are even finds that don't often survive being buried.
Our military expert has now identified this as being parachute silk. You're standing in a hut used by Easy Company, and you're touching a piece of parachute silk used by those paratroopers, and that's amazing. Is as good as a link to D-Day as you're ever going to get.
Eagerly sought personal items are also surfacing. They're helping to paint a picture of life outside of combat training.
This is a fairly fun piece of evidence. It's a bottle of Brill cream that they'd have put in their hair to make themselves look presentable, having had their training and got themselves ready for an evening out. One of the local buildings was a place where the Americans did a lot of their dancing with the local girls. The story goes that they made such good use of that venue that at the end of the war they had to pay for the floor to be relaid. The hall still exists today. The floor's in really good condition.
The dig is giving a unique insight into the reality of daily life for these brave men just at that moment before they left Britain for D-Day in June 1944.
This particular room, and I'm just standing by the entrance looking into the hut, is their last moment of quiet, peace, tranquility, and probably a great deal of reflection before they dropped in on Normandy. And that adds a real element of pathos, I think, to this particular site.
I've asked Richard to bring in some of those personal items for a closer look. And you've got some of the finds here from inside the hut, including that, which is extraordinary.
You know, the hairs on the back of my neck, when you find something like this, and we're talking paratroopers, this is a handle of a reserve parachute used by somebody in Easy Company.
So that's for your backup parachute?
That's right. Your first parachute is what's called a static line. It's pulled by the aircraft itself, and it opens up and you parachute down, hopefully, and if that doesn't work, you've got that to keep you alive.
And you've got some smaller objects, so talk me through these. What have we got here? A badge?
Well, that's a little touch of them being very human, in fact. It's a basketball supporters badge.
Let's get it under there. So there's a little basketball on there.
That's right. It says, I support, but tantalisingly, we don't know who this individual soldier supported. So you've got a little trace of them being keen on life back home, but just whom we don't know.
And this looks like something which you'd find on the head of a guitar.
I think it's a mandolin.
Oh, right.
They're passing time playing musical instruments, one of the ways that they kept themselves occupied in the evenings.
And what's this?
That is a nylon stocking found in the hut. I don't know how far we go into that. maybe some chap who'd used a lot of Brill cream and had done pretty well on his dancing skills.
Had a small gift with him.
There are numerous histories and anecdotes of the guys giving kids sweets and chewing gum, things like that, and luxuries, like these stockings. So it's all part of that liaising with the locals and getting them on side. It's a nice, tantalising touch again that this soldier might have had maybe happier things happening before they went to D-Day.
Yeah. And it is like we're looking at a little American colony in 1940s Britain.
That's right. We've got one small trench, but it's given us loads of finds relating to a pivotal moment in history and a really famous group of young men. And it is about Americana, it's about what they're doing to fight, what they're doing to try and stay human. And it's just a small keyhole into those days of 1943 and 1944. And as such, I think it's actually quite a fascinating little collection of finds.
And I think what's interesting too is that you're digging with veterans who are bringing their own experiences to bear on the archaeology they're uncovering.
Completely. We had several British military guys with us who have faced combat, so they know the sorts of experiences and traumas that these men have faced. And for them, that was a really important and powerful thing, because they could directly connect to the men of Easy Company, albeit from a 21st century perspective.
Yeah.
And therefore, finding this sort of thing for them was quite an emotional experience, I think.
We now return to the raising of the ferry Barracuda bomber from the murky waters just off the south coast. All of the parts that were recovered had now been transferred to the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Somerset, and our roving archaeologist Nisha McSweeney is there to see how the team is attempting to reconstruct this long-forgotten bomber.
The discovery of an intact Barracuda bomber was a world's first. But sadly, the salvage team could not raise it in one piece and had to bring it up in parts. At the Fleet Air Arm Museum, Dave Morris is head of an ambitious project to rebuild a whole Barracuda using only original parts. For the last 40 years, they've been collecting fragments salvaged from various crash sites. But these are very difficult to use in the rebuild because they're so battered and mangled. This could all be about to change with the treasure trove of parts raised over several days from the Solent. So Dave, where are we so far with the project, putting this giant multiple jigsaw pieces back together?
If you were to look at basically the plan form of a Barracuda and think, OK, let's build one of those, I think you would stop on day one. It would just become too mind-boggling.
Chief Engineer William Gibbs has been working on the project for 5 years. He has to identify each specific part, then work out where they go. It's a complex process.
So we might put something together and then it has to come apart again.
Okay.
Which is annoying, but it's just part of the process.
So far, he's rebuilt the cockpit. So just help me visualize this a bit more. You've got the pilot sitting here, you've got the wings over here. This is the nose of the airplane going behind us?
The engine, yes.
The engine.
The engine would fit in front there, in front of the pilot. So we've got the engine and propeller there, and then the remainder of the aircraft. And the tail would be 30 or so feet down in that direction. So it's just a big airplane.
This is a huge plane. The project is already providing a glimpse into the working lives of the people who built these planes more than 70 years ago.
On here we've got drawings, pencil drawings, done in the factory. We were the first people to see those drawings since they were doodled on in the Bolton and Paul factory, in the factory. Pretty poor factory behaviour. You shouldn't go scribbling and doodling on airplanes, but this was wartime Great Britain, and there was a little bit of camaraderie and morale going on.
Dave is now pinning his hopes on sections of the Barracuda raised from the Solent, providing a mountain of usable parts to help complete the build.
We started finding there were hundreds of really valuable fittings, tube ends, constructional details, components for the Barracuda that we could harvest. You can't even begin to measure how useful this is for the project.
As well as large sections such as the fuselage and the wing piece, outside the hangar, individual parts harvested from the Solent wreck are undergoing chemical preservation. So what have you got in these tanks? What's the magic solution that's getting rid of all this gunk?
This is just ordinary fresh water, tap water mixed with citric acid.
The citric acid helps reduce the alkalinity of the seawater, producing a more neutral pH solution. This helps to stabilize the parts and reduce any further degradation. Let's see what we got.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's a pipe, a bit of connecting pipe, and then we've got...
Ooh, yuck.
And the rubber's incredibly supple.
Oh, rubber?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this one does not smell good. There's a long way to go before all the components salvaged from the Solent wreck will be ready for use in the reconstruction of the plane. But Dave has already made some astonishing discoveries.
These are a pair of batteries from the Solent wreck, two 12-volt batteries, dated June 43. We couldn't resist putting a tester on the batteries, and one of them still has 0.86 residual volts of current in it. It's absolutely remarkable that after 76 years on the seabed, absolutely. So there are some remarkable, quirky little finds coming up from the Solent wreck.
I don't think I've ever seen a conservation challenge quite like this one. I'm used to working out on site with conservators to put together ancient pottery or other kinds of artefacts, and that's extremely difficult to do. But this is something on a different scale, right? The complexity of it is just ramped up hugely. The rebuild project has many years of work ahead, but Dave is now confident that with the Solent wreck, one day he will be able to wheel out a complete Barracuda, the very last of its kind.
We now move from British planes to German military hardware. One of the most destructive weapons developed by Nazi Germany was the V2 rocket, the forerunner to later ballistic missiles. Each rocket bore a warhead containing 900 kilograms of explosives, and it's thought that around 3,000 rockets were launched at Allied targets during the Second World War. We now join two brothers who are on the search for a V2 rocket, which fortunately never hit its target and ended up in a farmer's field. The hunt is focused near the village of Marden in Kent. Amateur military archaeologists Colin and Sean Welsh are on the trail of a V2 that struck here at 2:15 a.m. on the 9th of March 1945. Aerial imagery taken after the war shows it came down in this field.
We've excavated several
V2 rockets and V1 flying bombs. So I'm afraid to say we've become experts.
The V2 was the forerunner to rockets that would eventually put a man on the moon. It was invented in Germany in the 1930s and later developed as an explosive missile by the Nazis. The key to its long range was the innovation of using liquid oxygen and alcohol to propel the rocket. At the dig in Kent, the brothers hoped that the remains of the rocket could reveal clues to its trajectory and how it detonated. To help locate the impact site, they use a portable magnetometer.
If there are large steel parts in the ground, that will then cause a disturbance to the magnetic orientation in the ground. The magnetometer will detect that and give us a signal.
Using the survey results, they map out what they believe is the extent of the impact crater, now buried underground. And they start to dig. Just a metre down, and they're already finding indirect evidence of the detonation.
There was an orchard here, and obviously the trees were destroyed, and the damaged trees were pushed back into the hole and buried with the infill. And the one that you can see standing up just there, that's got a broken off top, which would have been caused by the blast of the device.
Strong magnetometer readings down in the hole indicate they're still on target. The heavy clay soil makes it difficult to locate small finds, but it does have its benefits.
This is the tiniest little bit here, and the aluminium looks almost fresh in the find, and that's because of the absence of oxygen in the hole. That's a good sign. It means that any future finds are going to be, hopefully, in a good state of preservation.
The V2 had a maximum range of 320 kilometres and travelled at over 1,000 metres per second.
It was travelling so fast that you could be stood at this spot and not know that a V2 was approaching. You wouldn't see it coming, you wouldn't hear it coming.
Launched at Britain from sites in the Nazi-controlled Netherlands, the V2s caused an estimated 9,000 British civilian and military deaths. As the brothers dig deeper, recognisable pieces of the rocket are now starting to emerge.
This is one of the support brackets for either the oxygen tank or the alcohol tank. That's quite a nice find. Let's just see what my brother concurs.
Right, well, I know what it is. But that's one of the clamps for the fuel tanks.
Well, I just said that I'd get you to confirm it with me.
OK, so you haven't told... Well,
I've told them.
OK, well, I'll come down again, show what a pair of nerds we are, that we know every bit of a V2 rocket.
Should be nearby. There's something...
Deeper still, and key parts of the supersonic engine are coming to light.
It doesn't look like very much at the moment, but this is a burner cup from the combustion chamber of the V2 rocket. I can tell that it's a burner cup because of that little bit of brass there, which was an injector nozzle. So alcohol was pushed through that to squirt a feed into the combustion chamber. There were 18 of these, and this is the first one out of our excavation.
That's 3.1.
As the excavation continues, the brothers make an intriguing discovery, linked to the precise moment of impact.
When we look down in there, we can see that the clay itself has changed colour. Rather than the nice bright yellow-orange in the surrounds, it's a horrible grey colour, which I think is due to the carbonisation of the materials.
The V2 was exploding as it travelled into the ground at 3 times the speed of sound. The detonation couldn't keep up with how fast it was travelling, so it got in at least 5 feet into the ground before it actually detonated.
This is a fascinating revelation.
The original intention was to try and create something like a blast weapon on the surface. What they didn't bargain for, the supersonic speed, took the rocket further into soft ground than they might have expected.
This V2 rocket had clearly gone off target when it hit the field. And it only detonated once it had penetrated the ground. The blast from its warhead would have been absorbed by the clay. 6 meters down, the brothers finally reached the bottom of the impact crater. The plan now is to clean and preserve the finds and scan them to create a digital archive.
I quite enjoy the physics of the excavation. I particularly enjoy building a representation of what it was that happened at the site. We found a lot about the geology and what it does to the finds. I think we've done pretty well.
Colin and Sean's excavation is part of an ongoing investigation into the role this terrifying weapon had on Britain during the war. Prior to D-Day in June 1944, the Allied forces staged a number of rehearsals of the landings, all in top secret. One of these was called Operation Tiger, and it would end in absolute tragedy. But because of the secrecy, very few people knew about it. Then, in the 1970s, one man uncovered evidence of the event and fought to bring the story to light. Nisha McSweeney met his son.
The incident took place off the Devon coast near Slapton Sands. Operation Tiger may have remained a forgotten moment in history if it wasn't for the amateur archaeological sleuthing of a local man named Ken Small. I'm meeting his son Dean to find out more.
When did your father first begin to suspect that there was something out there?
He was beachcombing and he came across things like tunic buttons, empty shell cases, identity bracelets, various parts of identity bracelets, all these bits, knives and forks, spoons, parts of them. And he thought, well, this is weird. Why would this be on a beach?
A local fisherman added to the mystery. He told Ken about a spot just out from the beach where their nets would snag on something large underwater. In the summer of 1974, Ken persuaded a diver friend to go down and take a look.
My dad took him out in a boat. He dived down, he came up and he said to my dad, it's a tank. And my dad said, well, what, an oil tank, water tank? He said, no, it's like an army tank. And my dad just thought, this is crazy, how can this be?
Ken started to search local records and military archives for answers. It was then that he stumbled across a wartime exercise codenamed Operation Tiger. Operation Tiger was carried out in April 1944. It was one of a number of practice exercises involving troops from Britain, the US and Canada that all took place in preparation for the Normandy landings. 30,000 US troops were sent to Slapton Sands to rehearse their part in D-Day.
All of this stuff was completely covered up. So there was very little evidence as to what went on, the actual exercises themselves.
Determined to find out more about the tank, in May 1984, Ken took amateur maritime archaeology to a new level. With the help of friends and local divers, he raised the tank off the seafloor.
They got a big bulldozer, they strapped a cable to it and they started to pull it along the concrete slipway. And amazingly, the tracks started to turn.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and then all the crustacea and stuff that had grown on the tank over years of being under the water all started to break away and crumble off. And you can actually see grease still on the thing. It's just amazing.
The tank was immediately jet cleaned and sprayed with rust preventer to protect it from decay.
So, this is it?
This is the tank.
It's enormous! It's amazing to think about this under the water, and of course they were snagging their nets. And
yeah.
Dean, this is crazy for me. So I'm used to when I dig up, you know, iron objects from the Iron Age, they come up as like really crusty, corroded things. It's hard to tell what they are, but this is in fabulous condition.
Ken had recovered an American amphibious Sherman DD tank.
So what happens is, all around the tank, there's this flotation collar, and it's raised with compressed air upwards, and it forms a complete skirt around the tank.
Fantastic. So it's a fully amphibious tank. Tank, boat, tank.
While the DD tank was ahead of its time, it could be quite unreliable. Several of them, including the one Ken raised off the seafloor, were known to have sunk during the D-Day rehearsals due to mechanical faults. But as Ken investigated further, he discovered that Operation Tiger wasn't just blighted by technical problems. Something far more deadly had occurred. By early 1944, the Germans knew Allied forces were planning to invade Nazi-controlled France. They just weren't sure where or when. By listening in to the Allied radio chatter, they got wind of Operation Tiger. On the 28th of April 1944, 9 German E-boats were sent out on patrol and headed for the coast of Devon. Armed with torpedoes, these were highly maneuverable, deadly attack craft. That night, Allied ships taking part in Operation Tiger came under attack. 2 US tank landing ships were sunk and 3 more badly damaged. More than 700 US servicemen drowned or died of hypothermia as they waited to be rescued. In 2012, 2 wartime shipwrecks known to lie off the Devon coast were formally identified as the 2 tank landing ships, or LSTs, that were sunk during Operation Tiger. As part of a project to grant the wrecks special status, maritime archaeologist Graham Scott is heading out to survey them.
What's really important about these wrecks is that they're associated with D-Day, and they're associated with practices for D-Day. Historic England have asked us to investigate these wrecks for them and to advise them what's left of them and how important they are.
Now anchored over the wrecks, they prepare to send down a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV. Equipped with sonar and specialist low-light cameras, the team can stream a live feed from 50 metres down, direct to the control room.
Okay, mate, that's us. We got visual, and we'll just work out what we're doing.
Let's orientate ourselves and let's move along to the west.
Today, Graham is concentrating on one of the ships. He wants to assess what state it's in, what equipment it was carrying, and any potentially live munitions still on board.
We are wondering whether we have found a gun here. We are rather hoping that this is evidence of the ship's armament. We could be wrong.
We start tethering easy. Tethering easy.
One thing we have to be careful with on a wreck like this is the presence of ammunition. We don't touch any of that. We back the ROV away to a safe distance. We've no real idea whether these things are still viable. We've got to treat them as though they could still potentially explode if we blunder into them.
Moving along the boat, the ROV camera captures a lifeboat crane, a cargo net, and the engine.
The hull is upside down. These were very shallow drafted vessels and they tended to capsize when they sank.
We now know that on the night of the attack, chaos ensued.
The men on board the landing ships thought that the firing initially was part of the exercise. And it was only when one of the ships was torpedoed and they saw this massive explosion that they realized they were actually under attack. And then all hell breaks loose. Everybody starts firing everywhere. Very confusing.
Following the deadly Nazi attack, the Operation Tiger disaster was quickly covered up. It remained largely unknown for decades, until Ken Small found and raised his tank. While the tank was not sunk in the enemy attack, it now stands as a permanent memorial to all the US servicemen who lost their lives during the D-Day rehearsal. Ken's son Dean still has his father's collection of artifacts.
These didn't come out of the tank.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. This one here is a rangefinder, and this, I believe, is used to work out the elevation for the main gun. The main gun in the turret of the tank.
Yeah, line of fire.
Line of fire. Yeah.
In recognition of Ken's determination to bring the story of Operation Tiger to light and remember the American soldiers who lost their lives, he received a letter of gratitude from the president.
Dear Mr. Small,
Yes.
on behalf of all Americans, thank you for your kind and generous efforts. Sincerely, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
I think it's a really important story that deserves to be much more widely told. I mean, it's a big kind of part of the preparations for D-Day, which we just hadn't heard about. It took someone like Ken to get that story out there and to give those people who died and their families and the survivors a voice and something to kind of remember it by.
During the war, Northern Ireland had 28 airfields home to both RAF and US Army Air Force crews. Whether through combat damage, mechanical failure or pilot error, not every plane returned home. For our final dig, a team of archaeologists has been joined by an army of volunteer school children from both sides of the Irish border, and they are excavating the site of a crashed American fighter plane. On December the 17th, 1942, 22-year-old American pilot, Second Lieutenant Milo Rundell, was returning to the Royal Naval Air Station at Eglinton when he went off course. As part of an ongoing project to highlight the role played by Northern Ireland during the war, aviation historian Johnny McNee has been trying to find Rundell's plane.
We have eyewitnesses said a plane crashed in this direction. What we're trying to work out from the archaeology, is that correct? And the orientation of the aircraft did it go in vertically? Did it sort of bounce across the field and then sadly bury itself into a corner?
Rundell parachuted safely down into Northern Ireland and returned to base. But his plane hit the ground somewhere near the town of Castle Blaney in County Monaghan, just south of the border in Ireland. While parts of the plane were recovered at the time of the crash, it hit the ground so hard that much of it still lies buried.
We're fairly sure that these are engine parts. Lots of cables, clamps, ducts, bits of very contorted and smashed up metalwork with a distinct aroma of fuel off it.
It looks to be part of the outside, we're thinking, because it has that greenish paint on it.
Not 100% sure. We have a long hinged object here. Could be a door, could be... It's very light material.
Records reveal that Lieutenant Rundell was flying a US fighter plane known as a Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was the first fighter aircraft to fly faster than 400 miles per hour. With its 4 nose-mounted machine guns and 20mm cannon, it was feared by Allied enemies. The Japanese called it 2 planes, 1 pilot because of its unusual design. The Germans knew it as the fork-tailed devil. Back at the dig, Johnny is now finding clues that can be traced back to where the plane was manufactured.
We're finding lots of these little fuel clamps. And these clamps hold, the insulation and rubber tubing around various parts. You can see the manufacturer, the patent number, so it's Witex Manufacturing Company, Chicago, USA. And even look at that. Still threaded, still working.
We know that Witex made fuel clamps for the P-38, so the team are definitely digging in the right place. Johnny is now recognising other specific parts of the plane.
That's a serious bit of sheet steel. That must be 5, 6, 7 mil thick, so it's not light aluminium. It's there for a purpose, and that purpose would be to stop bullets hitting the pilot or the engine components.
Confident they have found Rundell's P-38 Lightning, the layout and condition of the wreckage is also providing clues as to how it crashed.
The debris that we're getting here suggests that the aircraft did enter the ground almost, I would say, at about a 70-80 degree angle into the ground. You've got to imagine this iconic design, 2 engines, without a pilot, roaring from across the sky, running low on fuel from the west. It's come in almost vertical into our stony field, and this iconic design has been turned in a matter of seconds into this crumpled pile of metal that you can see.
For the schoolchildren volunteers, the dig is giving them a tangible connection to the brave young pilots that were based near here almost 80 years ago.
Sort of bringing history to life. So it's like relating the artefacts to what we're learning, and we can see really like what happened and how it would have like looked in an outside perspective.
I've asked Johnny to bring in some of the finds to see what else we can learn about this plane and its pilot.
So what have we got here then? Where do these parts belong to on the Lightning?
You've got little inlet exhaust valves from the engine, broken bits of the cockpit that locks the cockpit latches down when you shut it and go flying, and you can see the little serrated buttons here just for locking your cockpit closed. We have some of the perspex, still with the distinct wartime olive drab paint on it, and some of the very fearsome nose armament was also recovered. So we have 2 50 caliber bullets. There are 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns on the front, plus a 20mm cannon.
And then there's a plate here.
Yes, that was one of the star finds by the pupils. I mean, they really were forensically going through the soil, and one of them said, "Oh, I've got a little plate with writing on it." And you can see there all the drawing information, the contract, the date, tells you the oil capacity, and then right at the bottom, Lockheed Aviation Course. So that 100% proves that we were dealing with the crash of a Lockheed P-38. That was a good find.
Well, what on earth are those?
They came out, if you can imagine, in our profile, we had engine wreckage, cockpit wreckage, and engine wreckage. And these were in the cockpit. And there was a lot of head scratching amongst the team. You know, people were suggesting they were like butter paddles or they were something agricultural.
Yeah.
And we put some articles into the P-38 Association magazine in America and said, does anybody know what these are? Before we make some grand announcement and look stupid.
Yeah.
And a guy came back and says, your plane was going to fly in the Mediterranean Theatre of Operations. Those go into the air intakes to stop that sandy wind from blowing in and clogging up your engines. And then you can see traces of yellow paint on the handles, so they would flag up as you're doing your walk around in the morning. Right, I better take these out.
Yeah, you don't want to fly with them still in, do you?
No, that would be a bad day.
And what happened to the pilots themselves?
Yes, so Second Lieutenant Milo Rundal from Iowa. He then goes to Tunisia, and less than a month later, he is shot down, and he ends up being captured and then taken to Stalag-Luft 3, and he was there for the rest of the war, and he was there during the time when the Great Escape was taking place.
Is he still with us?
No, sadly, he passed away in 2006, but his daughter tells us that he was a great patriot, loved the P-38, and he did a lot of flying after the war as well, but a lot of time for the P-38. And when I said, what do you think he would think of what, you know, we and the pupils are doing here?
Yeah.
And he said, like, that generation, he would have laughed. And I said, what are you doing, you know, looking after my old P-38? You know, what's all the fuss about?
Yeah.
He was just that, you know, greatest generation type of a character.
Although the Second World War happened just 80 years ago and we have plenty of historical records of the time, archaeology provides us with different insights and personal connections with this important episode in our country's history.